He had everything but always dined alone, until his ex as a waitress said these words. "Hi, I'm Selena from Heartwoven Tales. Tell me, where are you listening from right now? Today I have a story that will grip your heart from the very first second. He had everything, but always dined alone, until his ex as a waitress said these words." Imagine a man with power, wealth, and influence, yet every night he dines alone, until the woman he broke years ago walks into his life holding the greatest secret he never expected. This story is full of love, regret, and shocking twists that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last second. I created this story to show how choices, patience, and second chances can change everything. Make sure you watch till the end, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's dive in. Patrick Vale entered the restaurant the way he entered every place in his life, without hesitation, without looking around, without waiting for permission. The staff recognized him instantly, not because he demanded attention, but because his presence changed the temperature of a room. He walked straight toward the back corner where the light was softer and the noise thinned out. The table already prepared the way it always was. One chair pulled out, the other pushed in, empty and untouched. He didn't acknowledge the chair, didn't comment on it, didn't correct the waiter who instinctively set 2 glasses and then quietly removed one. Patrick loosened his cufflinks instead of his tie, sat down and placed his phone face down as if the screen itself could accuse him of something. Around him, couples leaned close, glasses clinked. Conversations overlapped, but his table existed in its own pocket of silence, a silence he had chosen night after night because it asked nothing from him and offered no disappointment in return. He didn't open the menu. He never did. He already knew what the restaurant served, just as he knew what his evenings would look like. Work calls ignored, emails piling up, the same meal, the same chair across from him, staying empty like a rule that had never been challenged. A waiter passed by and nodded. Patrick nodded back, eyes fixed on the table surface, tracing a faint scratch in the wood that had been there longer than most of his relationships. He took a sip of water and let the cold settle, grounding himself, reminding himself that this was control, that this was peace. Then a voice spoke behind him, not loud enough to draw attention, not soft enough to be mistaken for background noise, a voice that didn't ask permission to exist in his space. "You still prefer silence over company." Patrick didn't turn immediately. His shoulders stiffened first, his fingers curling slightly against the edge of the table, as if his body recognized the voice before his mind allowed it. Slowly, deliberately, he turned, expecting his instincts to betray him, expecting to see a stranger, a coincidence, anything that wouldn't undo the careful distance he had built around himself. Instead, Binta stood there in a waitress uniform, black and plain, hair tied back neatly, posture professional, eyes steady in a way that made his chest tighten. There was no surprise on her face, no accusation, no warmth either. She slid a menu onto the table between them with a calm efficiency that hurt more than anger ever could. "Good evening, sir," she said evenly. "May I take your order?" For a moment, Patrick couldn't speak. The room felt louder, then suddenly too quiet, like everything had pulled back to watch without actually looking. "Binta," he said finally, her name coming out rough, unfamiliar, as if he hadn't practiced it in his head for years. She didn't respond to it, didn't correct him, didn't acknowledge it at all. Her eyes stayed on his face the way a professional looks at a guest, attentive but detached, waiting. "Is this real?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost cautious. She didn't blink. "It's just dinner," she replied, her tone neutral, dismissing the weight of his question as if it didn't deserve more than that. Patrick laughed under his breath, a sound that carried no humor. "You're working here?" he asked, searching her face for something familiar. "Yes," she answered simply. "I work here." He leaned forward slightly. "Since when?" She paused just long enough for him to notice. "Long enough," she said, pen already in her hand. What would you like to order? The question irritated him more than it should have. You don't have to act like this, he said quietly. We know each other. Her eyes lifted to his then, not sharp, not emotional, just firm. We did, she corrected. Please order. Patrick glanced around the restaurant, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt despite no one paying them any attention. Why this place? He asked. Why here? Her pen hovered over the page, then continued moving. Some places remind men what loneliness feels like, she said flatly. The words hit him slower than he expected, settling deep instead of striking. He looked at the empty chair across from him, then back at her. You chose this restaurant because of me, he said. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. Sir, she said calmly, I need your order. Patrick stood up then, the chair scraping softly against the floor, drawing a few glances before people lost interest. You disappeared, he said, keeping his voice low. One day you were there, and then you weren't. She finally looked at him fully, her expression unchanged, but her eyes colder now. I didn't disappear, she replied. I stopped waiting. He shook his head. I was building something, he said. I thought you understood. She tilted her head slightly. You thought wrong, she said. You were always building. I was always alone. The words weren't loud, but they landed heavy. Patrick swallowed. I didn't know you felt that way, he said. She almost smiled then. Almost. That was the problem, she replied. You never knew. She stepped back, creating distance with practiced ease. I'll come back for your order, she said, already turning away. Binta, Patrick said again, firmer this time. She stopped but didn't turn. Why are you here? He asked. The question hung between them, unanswered for a beat too long. Because this table is always empty, she said finally, glancing briefly at the chair across from him before walking away. Patrick sank back into his seat, the space across from him suddenly louder than any conversation in the room. He watched her move through the restaurant. Efficient, controlled, laughing softly with another waiter, a laugh that no longer belonged to him. For the first time in years, Patrick Vale felt like a guest in his own life, sitting at a table that had never been empty by accident. Binta didn't return to serve him because she had to. She returned because she wanted him to finally notice what he had been dining beside all along. Patrick sank back into his chair, staring at the empty space across from him, the chair now more like a challenge than a symbol. His fingers curled around the edge of the table, knuckles whitening, and he could feel the weight of years of silence pressing down on his chest. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, imagining apologies, explanations, excuses, even confessions of love. But now that she was here, standing with a menu in her hand, poised and distant, he realized that rehearsed words meant nothing. His throat felt tight, and the air seemed heavier, thicker, as if the restaurant itself was waiting for him to speak, as if the walls remembered every night she'd waited for a man who never came. Binta, he said softly, trying to bridge the gap that had grown between them silently over the years. She looked at him, pen poised, eyes sharp, professional, and without breaking her posture, she said, "Please order. I have other guests." The words were polite, almost neutral, but the edge beneath them cut him deeper than any anger could have. He opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it, realizing that asking questions now might only make him seem weak or desperate, and weakness had never been part of Patrick Vale's vocabulary. He tried again, slower this time. Why this restaurant? Why did you choose to be here? Her eyes flicked to his, cold, measured, almost like weighing a decision he wasn't qualified to influence. Some places teach men what loneliness feels like, she said finally, her words deliberate, slicing through the distance, through the noise of the other tables, the background chatter, the clinking of glasses, and landing squarely on him. Patrick swallowed hard, his mind flipping through memories he had tried to bury, nights when he had been consumed by work, boardrooms, endless deals, while she sat alone at home, waiting for a call that never came, waiting for a presence that was promised but never delivered. The irony was sharp, bitter, and he felt it pierce his chest with a physical ache he hadn't expected. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally, leaning forward slightly as if the motion could shorten the gap of time and distance between them. Her eyes didn't waver. She didn't soften. She met his gaze fully, the calm steadiness in her expression, making him feel like a child caught in a truth he hadn't wanted to face. "That's the problem, Patrick," she said, her voice quiet, almost conversational, but every word carried the weight of years. "You never meant anything." The sentence hit him with the force of a hammer, sharp, unrelenting, leaving him frozen, unable to breathe for a fraction of a second longer than humanly natural. Patrick gripped the table, his fingers digging into the wood, knuckles going white again, and for the first time in years, he felt small, irrelevant, stripped of power, influence, and control. I thought I was doing what was best," he said, the words tasting hollow even as they left his mouth. She didn't flinch. "Doing what was best?" she echoed softly, tilting her head slightly, one eyebrow raised as if his explanation were a curiosity, not a defense. "Doing what was best left me alone," she said, her voice level, steady. But inside it carried the echoes of every night she had eaten alone, of every disappointment, of every silence that had stretched longer than a year. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain that it had never been about ignoring her, that it had never been about abandoning her, but her eyes wouldn't allow it. They held him in place, and for the first time, Patrick realized that sometimes words, even justified ones, were meaningless when weighed against the accumulation of absence. I didn't know," he whispered finally. "You didn't know what?" she asked. The pen hovered above the notepad again, as if she had to make him repeat the question to himself before he could understand the answer. "That you were suffering," he said. "That He hesitated. "That I left you to face it alone." She let out a quiet sound that was almost a sigh, but not quite. "I learned to eat alone because of you," she said finally, turning slightly away to jot something down for the table next to them, refusing to meet his eyes again, refusing to offer any relief. Patrick felt the sting of regret now, sharper than any loss he had felt in business, sharper than any failure he had ever faced. The realization was slow, methodical, leaving him feeling exposed, helpless, hollow. Regret, he understood finally, was different when it was measured in years, when it was delivered too late, when the person you hurt had built walls so high that no apology could climb them easily. He leaned back, staring at the empty chair across from him, the chair that once symbolized possibility, but now seemed a reminder of everything he had broken. "Do you hate me?" he asked quietly, almost afraid of her answer. She didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, long, deliberate, unyielding, making the air between them heavier, almost impossible to breathe. Then she said simply, "I don't need to hate you. You already showed me the way you feel about me without words." Patrick's chest tightened again. Her tone wasn't cruel, wasn't emotional, but it made him feel small, inadequate, powerless. He had built empires, conquered cities, and yet here, in this corner of a restaurant, he was unarmed, unprepared, fragile in a way he hadn't known existed inside him. He swallowed, struggling for composure. I thought if I worked hard enough, built enough, that I could give you everything," he admitted, voice low, rough, filled with the strain of unshed emotion. "Everything?" she said, looking at him finally, letting her gaze linger in a way that made his confession feel hollow. "You gave me nothing that mattered when I needed it," she said. Her words weren't a condemnation, but they carried the weight of every meal eaten alone, every night spent, wondering if she had been forgotten entirely, every hope carefully packed away and left to gather dust. Patrick's throat burned. His hands tightened around the edge of the table again. I don't know how to fix it, he admitted, his voice shaking slightly. She didn't answer right away. She tilted her head slightly, studied him like one studies a complicated problem, and then said, "Some things can't be fixed by showing up now." The words didn't scream, didn't demand, didn't punish, but inside them was the knowledge of everything he had lost, of every silent dinner, every unreturned call, every promise broken without realizing it. He felt the weight settle fully onto his shoulders, heavier than any debt, heavier than any failure he had encountered in business, heavier than any defeat he had ever acknowledged. Patrick tried one last approach, leaning forward, voice almost pleading. I want to make it right. Not just now, not just tonight. I want to fix what I broke. Can we start over?" Binta finally met his eyes, steady, unwavering, and her pen stayed still for a long moment. "Start over?" she repeated almost quietly, almost softly, but the edge beneath it was razor sharp. "Start over means trusting me again. Start over means believing I won't leave. Can you promise that?" He hesitated, realizing that his presence here, his apologies, his regret, even his desire, were meaningless unless she chose to accept them. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed hard, words failing, nothing prepared for the barrier she had built around herself. She straightened, pen now back in hand, approaching another table, glancing once over her shoulder. "Order, please," she said lightly, almost casually, but the tension lingered like smoke in the air, inescapable. Patrick's fingers dug into the table again, the knuckles pressing into the wood, eyes following her back as she moved, controlled, confident, professional, leaving him grappling with a helplessness he had never felt. Regret, he realized, was not a tool, not a weapon, not even a lesson. It was a mirror, reflecting everything you had failed to see, everything you had failed to protect, everything you had lost without ever noticing. The waiter passed by, glasses clinking. Someone laughed nearby, a birthday celebrated at another table, yet Patrick barely noticed. The world around him existed in a blur because the only thing that mattered now was the space Binta had left behind, the words she had said, the reality she had forced him to face. Her footsteps, her voice, her gaze, it was all a chain of reminders that he had lost something irreplaceable, something no apology could fully recover. And yet, even as she walked away, even as the next table demanded her attention, he felt a spark, however faint, that some bridge might still exist if he could somehow earn it. If he could somehow prove that he was not the man who abandoned, ignored, and left her behind. Patrick gripped the table, torn between hope and fear, wondering if regret alone could ever earn forgiveness. Could words finally spoken ever repair the silence she had endured for years? And as Binta's back disappeared into the bustling restaurant, the question lingered in the air, heavier than any meal. Was the man she once loved too late? Or was there still a chance she could let him back in? Patrick stood there, frozen, heart hammering, mind racing, realizing that love does not leave with a bang. It fades quietly, invisibly, leaving traces in small moments, in missed calls, in empty chairs, in dinners eaten alone. And for the first time, he understood the full weight of his absence, the magnitude of the consequences that had slipped past him unnoticed, and the truth that maybe, just maybe, some things could never be undone. Patrick's chest tightened as she walked away, leaving him on the sidewalk alone, wondering if this was the final goodbye. Could he ever reclaim what he had lost, or had time already sealed her heart? And as her figure disappeared down the street, the question lingered. Was there still a bridge he could cross, or had silence already spoken louder than words ever could? Patrick stood on the sidewalk long after Binta disappeared down the street, the chill of the night pressing against him like the weight of every regret he had carried for years. He didn't move for several minutes, just letting the city lights flicker around him, watching people pass, couples laughing, someone honking a horn, and realizing with every pulse of his heart that nothing could undo what had happened. Yet even in that quiet, the thought of seeing her again consumed him, made him restless, a fire that would not die no matter how far he walked. By the next evening, he was back, and the night after that, and the night after that, without expectation, without hope, simply because something in him refused to let her go entirely, refused to leave the empty chair across from him unoccupied by the one person who mattered more than all else. Each night, he ordered 2 meals, one for himself, one for her, leaving the second untouched, but untouched in memory, a placeholder for what he could not yet claim. He sat quietly, letting the murmurs of other patrons wash over him, ignoring their glances, pretending the world was still within his control, though he knew it wasn't. And every night he watched the door, every movement, every shadow, hoping for a glimpse of her familiar step, the faint sway of her hair pulled back, the steady rhythm of a presence that had once filled every corner of his life. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, yet he waited. Not because he believed she would return, but because he understood for the first time what patience meant, to wait without demanding a reward, to hope without presuming to claim what had been lost. Then, one evening, as rain began to slick the streets outside with glimmering reflections of neon signs, she appeared. Not just in the doorway, not just passing by, but walking toward him deliberately, eyes scanning the room, landing finally on him, and pausing just long enough to register the surprise on her face at seeing him still there. Patrick rose slightly, chair scraping softly against the floor as he tried to measure the moment, to control it, but control felt hollow now. She moved to the table, hands clasped in front of her, posture straight, measured, and he could see the faintest tremor of tension in her jaw, the subtle hesitation in her step. As if she too had wondered what this reunion meant. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, finally, voice calm but edged with something sharper, something wary, like a shield built over years of absence. Patrick didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid something across the table, a crisp envelope with familiar handwriting, formal but deliberate. "I quit the life that made me lose you," he said softly, voice steady despite the storm of nerves and emotion rising within him. Binta froze, eyes widening slightly as the envelope landed near her hands. She rose instinctively, chair scraping back, stance defensive yet trembling, almost imperceptibly, as if his gesture had struck a nerve deeper than words ever could. "Don't confuse guilt with love," she warned, voice low, firm, a boundary drawn in the air between them. Patrick leaned forward, the faint light of the overhead lamp catching the lines of his face, the weight of sleepless nights, the hollow ache of regret finally made visible. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said, voice softer now, more vulnerable than she had heard before, though no one else in the restaurant paid them any attention. "I'm asking to become better, for myself, for the life I should have lived with you, for everything I neglected when I was too blind to see what mattered." Her eyes studied him, sharp and discerning, scanning for lies, for manipulation, for weakness, and she saw none, only the raw honesty he had so rarely allowed to surface. And for the first time, she felt that uncertainty, that stirring inside that made her question the walls she had built so carefully over the years. Patrick watched her closely, noting every flicker of expression, every hesitation, every subtle movement that betrayed the internal struggle she refused to voice. She finally sat down, slowly, deliberately, the chair scraping softly against the floor, yet her body still rigid with control, the pen still hovering in her hand, as if she was measuring every breath, every heartbeat, every word before allowing them to pass. "Why now?" she asked finally, voice low, almost hesitant. "Why return to me after everything?" Patrick leaned forward slightly, eyes never leaving hers. "Because I finally understand what I lost," he said simply. "And because I'm willing to wait as long as it takes to prove that I can be the man you deserved all along." Her gaze flicked down at the envelope, then back up at him. "And if waiting isn't enough?" she asked cautiously. A trace of steel underlining the words, a subtle warning that she would not be swayed easily. Patrick exhaled slowly, voice quiet, steady, determined. "Then I'll keep waiting," he said, "even if it's for the rest of my life. Even if it means earning the chance one day, not demanding it tonight. Even if it means watching you walk away again, I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes to become better, to honor what I should have never let go." Binta's eyes softened slightly, just enough for him to notice. A crack in the armor she had worn for years, a hesitation that revealed more than any words could. She stood abruptly, hands clasped tightly in front of her, gaze averted. "You're asking a lot," she said, almost a whisper, almost a warning, yet there was something unspoken in the way she avoided his eyes, something heavier than anger. A secret buried beneath years of self-protection and pride. Patrick nodded, leaning back, his own hands resting gently on the table, steady, patient. "I know, and I'm ready to accept whatever it takes. No shortcuts, no excuses, no promises I can't keep. Only time, only effort, only honesty." She walked toward the door, pausing just short of leaving, eyes flicking back to him for a fraction of a second, holding a world of questions, of doubts, of unspoken truths that even her strength could not fully contain. "Be careful, Patrick," she said quietly, voice calm but edged with warning. "Don't think one gesture erases years. Don't think waiting alone makes it right. You're still the man who left me behind." He watched her hesitate. That microsecond where she wanted to say more but didn't, that almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders, the slight tightening of her jaw, and he knew she was protecting something, some truth she hadn't shared yet, a piece of herself she wasn't ready to reveal, and that realization struck him deeper than any apology ever could. Patrick exhaled, sitting back as she disappeared into the night. Patrick sat in the small corner of the coffee shop he had found near the restaurant, the same table he always chose, watching the steam rise from his cup. The hum of conversation around him was distant, irrelevant. His eyes kept flicking to the door, to the entrance, waiting. Waiting had become a rhythm, a part of him now, as natural as breathing, though it still brought a tight ache to his chest every time she didn't appear. He hadn't expected her to walk in that night. Not like this. Yet as soon as the bell above the door jingled, his chest jumped, and there she was. Binta, coat draped over her shoulders, bag swinging lightly at her side, hair slightly tousled, eyes scanning the room with the same cautious vigilance he remembered from the first night he saw her return. She spotted him immediately, and there was a moment, just a fraction of a second, where recognition flashed across her face before she smoothed it into her usual calm mask. Patrick stood slowly, heart pounding, hands gripping the edge of the table. "Binta," he said, voice low, steady, yet loaded with anticipation, relief, and fear all at once. She nodded curtly, almost as if greeting a stranger, though her eyes betrayed something deeper, a faint hesitation, a shadow of the walls she had built to protect herself. She slid into the chair across from him, folding her coat neatly on her lap, glancing at the cup of coffee he had already ordered for her. "You've made this into a habit," she said lightly, almost teasing, though the weight beneath the words was unmistakable. "Waiting, day after day." Patrick smiled faintly. A small curve of the lips that carried more meaning than any grand gesture could. "Waiting has its purpose," he said softly. "Sometimes it teaches patience, Sometimes it shows what matters most. She raised an eyebrow, almost imperceptibly, studying him carefully, her lips pressing into a straight line, as if measuring whether his words were hollow or true. "And what matters most to you?" she asked finally. Patrick leaned forward, voice steady, earnest. "You," he said simply. "You always mattered. And I finally understand that it's not enough to show up late. It's not enough to say sorry. You needed presence, consistency, honesty, and I failed to give you any of it for too long." Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning his face, searching for hidden intentions, for lies she had learned to detect over years of heartbreak and distance. "And now?" she asked softly, voice barely above the hum of the coffee shop. "Now I am here," Patrick replied, leaning closer across the table, hands resting lightly on the wood. "Now I can only offer what I failed to give before: honesty, attention, time. I can't undo the past, but I can promise every day forward will be different, if you allow it." Binta's gaze softened for the briefest instant before retreating into guarded neutrality again. "Patrick," she said quietly, almost a whisper, "I don't know if I can love you again." The words landed like stones, heavy, weighted, leaving Patrick still for a moment, letting her speak, letting her pain fill the space between them. His chest ached, not with anger or frustration, but with the sharp, searing pull of longing he had ignored for too long. He reached for her hand instinctively, only to pull back, realizing that he couldn't demand her trust or force her feelings. "Then let me love you without conditions," he said finally, voice low, deliberate. "Not demanding anything in return, not asking for forgiveness tonight, just letting love exist in whatever form you allow it to." She blinked, quickly, looking down at her hands folded in her lap. A small tremor passed through her, almost invisible, but Patrick noticed it. The subtle quiver of suppressed emotion she tried to hide. That's not fair," she said softly, almost faltering. "Fair?" he asked, eyebrows rising, leaning forward. "Binta, love has nothing to do with fair. It has to do with what you feel, what you allow, and what you're willing to accept. I'm not asking for fairness. I'm asking for presence, honesty, and a chance." Her lips pressed together, swallowing against something she clearly wanted to release: tears, anger, a mixture of emotions too complex to voice. Patrick watched her, studying every micro-expression, every blink, every shift of weight. He saw her hesitation, the invisible barrier she maintained even as hope fluttered faintly behind it. She started, voice low, halting. He waited, letting the silence stretch, giving her the space she needed, not rushing, not pressing. "I don't know if I can," she finally said, shaking her head slowly. Patrick nodded, accepting it without complaint, without arguing, without begging. "Then I'll love you without expectation," he said simply. "Even if you never return it, even if you leave again, I'll wait as long as it takes to prove I can be better. That's all I ask, for a chance to exist alongside you honestly." She blinked, a single tear escaping despite herself, rolling down her cheek, and she hastily brushed it away, as if denying it would erase the years of pain it represented. Patrick watched, heart tightening, every part of him aching to reach across the table, to hold her, to shield her from the heartbreak he had caused. You always make things complicated," she whispered, almost bitterly, almost frustrated, but there was something tender beneath the words, a glimmer of the connection they had once shared, a fragile reminder of what could have been. Patrick smiled softly, voice gentle. "Life is complicated. Love is more so. But complexity doesn't erase the truth. You mattered. You still matter. And I'll prove it every day, however long it takes." Her gaze lingered on him, searching, measuring, questioning, for a moment that stretched, suspended fragile. She exhaled, almost inaudibly, pushing her hair back over her shoulder, tucking it neatly behind her ear, the motion simple but deliberate. "Tomorrow," she said quietly. Patrick froze, sensing the weight behind the single word. "I'm leaving the city tomorrow," she added, voice low but firm. The words landed with a shock that he felt in his chest, throat tightening as he realized the limited time they had together now, that the fragile connection they had just begun to rebuild could be torn apart again by distance, by decisions already made, by the unstoppable flow of life outside their little corner of the world. "Tomorrow?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, trying not to let panic seep in, but failing as his pulse quickened. "Yes," she said simply. "I can't stay. I have things to take care of." "Life doesn't pause for anyone, Patrick. Not even for us." He leaned back slightly, letting the words sink, watching the subtle tension in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible trembling of her hands as she held her cup. "Then I'll wait," he said quietly, finally accepting the reality she imposed, the distance, the separation, the necessity of patience. "Even if it's alone, even if it takes years, I'll wait for as long as it takes." Her eyes flickered, searching his face, reading his determination, his sincerity, and for a fleeting moment the walls she had built seemed to falter, though only slightly, enough to hint at possibility without giving him the comfort of certainty. The next morning, Patrick followed her to the station. He didn't stop her from leaving. He didn't plead or beg. He walked beside her, silent. Watching her move through the crowd, the hum of travelers and the announcement over the loudspeakers fading into the background. Her hand brushed against the strap of her bag, fingers tightening instinctively, as if grounding herself before the leap into the unknown. Patrick felt the ache of absence again, the sharp sting of letting her go while holding on to hope, knowing that this separation was another test of patience, endurance, and love. "Promise me something," she said finally, looking over her shoulder briefly, voice soft, almost a whisper. "Promise me you won't change who you are while I'm gone. Promise me you'll keep waiting honestly and not fall back into the patterns that hurt us." Patrick nodded, voice firm, steady. "I promise," he said. "I'll wait honestly. I'll be the man you deserve when you return. No shortcuts, no excuses. Only me, waiting, trying, and learning." She gave a small nod, eyes glistening, shoulders relaxing slightly, then turned to board the train, leaving Patrick standing on the platform, watching her disappear into the blur of motion, into the unknown. The station seemed louder suddenly, harsher, the clamor of life around him a reminder of all that had been lost and all that might still be salvaged. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle into him, and felt a strange calm amidst the ache. Even as the train pulled away, even as the crowd shifted and moved past him, he understood that their story was far from over. Their chapter was incomplete, written in pauses, glances, silences, and half-spoken truths. What remained unsaid between them was more than words could capture. Trust, fear, hope, lingering regrets, and unspoken promises that now rested entirely on the foundation of patience, endurance, and the willingness to truly listen. Patrick watched the train fade into the distance, heart heavy, chest tight, knowing that waiting alone was only the beginning. Could time heal the walls she had built? Could his patience withstand the separation? And most importantly, what unspoken truths did Binta carry with her that might still alter everything when their paths crossed again? 6 months had passed since Binta left the city, and Patrick had lived every day in the quiet ache of absence, measuring time in breaths, glances, and memories of moments he could not reclaim. The coffee shop visits, the waiting, the long silent nights had transitioned into something new, a determination to rebuild, to create something meaningful that reflected not power or status, but honesty, humility, and presence. He had poured himself into a small restaurant, a place that felt like home rather than an empire, where people came not to see his name on a marquee, but to experience the warmth of care, of meals prepared with thought, not for appearances, but for connection. Every detail mattered. Tables carefully spaced, lights gentle and inviting, chairs sturdy yet welcoming, menus simple, approachable, yet designed to honor the craft of food and the respect for those who would sit and share in it. Opening night was a quiet, intimate affair. He had set 2 plates at the corner table, the same table he had once claimed for solitude, now prepared with intention for 2. Anticipation carefully folded into the arrangement of silverware and glasses, the subtle aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with the warmth of the room. He moved among the tables, greeting early patrons with ease, though his mind kept wandering to the doorway, to the possibility that she might walk in. Each chime of the bell, each footstep made his chest constrict with hope, fear, and an aching anticipation he had carried for half a year. Every sound, every movement outside the windows, every shadow shifting on the street seemed magnified, his senses acutely tuned to the possibility of seeing her again. And then she appeared. Not slowly, not tentatively, but with a purpose that made the air tighten around him. Binta walked through the doorway, hand gently grasping a small, curious hand that swung lightly by her side. Patrick froze mid-step, breath caught somewhere between hope and disbelief, as the 3-year-old girl beside her looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. The child's gaze pierced through every layer of caution, every ounce of control he had maintained, and Patrick's chest constricted as he took in the full reality of what he was seeing. "Mama, is this him?" the child asked, voice clear, bright, and unafraid. Patrick's throat went dry, his mind racing, heart hammering against ribs as he stared, unable to move, as the weight of unimagined consequences crashed over him. Binta's voice, quiet and controlled, cut through the shock of the moment. "Her name is Era," she said softly, eyes meeting his with a calm certainty that made him realize the depth of what he had missed, the scope of life that had continued without him. She paused, the room around them fading into background noise, the clatter of dishes, the soft murmur of patrons, the subtle glow of the restaurant's lights, all irrelevant, as she added quietly, almost reverently, "She's yours." The words fell like stones into the well of his heart, sinking deeper than any apology, any confession, any plea could ever reach. Patrick's knees weakened, breath caught, and for the first time in months, he felt the full magnitude of absence, of choices, and the irreversibility of time. He knelt instinctively before Era, heart hammering, hands hovering, unsure if he could touch without frightening her, unsure if he could speak without shattering the fragile silence. "Era," he whispered, voice barely above the soft hum of the room. I'm Patrick." The girl tilted her head, eyes wide, and reached out a tiny hand, brushing it lightly against his cheek. The contact was electric, a connection both immediate and terrifying, confirming a reality he had never been prepared to face. Patrick's chest constricted as he felt the pulse of life, the proof of choices he had never made, consequences he had never anticipated, and the sudden overwhelming responsibility of being confronted with a child he had never known existed. Binta's presence beside her was steady, calm, almost protective, as though she were shielding both herself and her daughter from the magnitude of this reunion. "She doesn't know you," she said quietly, voice low, even, almost whispering, though Patrick heard every word clearly. "And I couldn't tell her, not until I was sure, not until I knew you had changed, not until I knew you were ready to be here, really here, not as someone who left, but as someone who stays." Her eyes searched his, piercing, weighing, measuring, as though the past 6 months of growth, waiting, and change were now being judged in this single moment. Patrick swallowed hard, nodding slightly, voice catching. I am here. I've been waiting for this moment longer than I thought I could endure. I will do whatever it takes to be present, to be part of her life, to be part of yours. I know I don't deserve it, not yet, not fully, but I am here, and I will prove it. Era's eyes sparkled with curiosity, small fingers tugging at his sleeve, and Patrick's chest tightened again, heart hammering with a mix of fear, awe, and the thrill of hope. He reached out, letting her take his hand fully, feeling the warmth, the pulse of life, and an immediate sense of responsibility that had nothing to do with ambition or achievement, and everything to do with presence, attention, and care. Binta's voice, low and deliberate, continued to cut through the charged silence. You've had 6 months to become someone who could handle this, to become someone I could trust with both our lives, to become someone who could be patient, kind, and responsible. Are you that man, Patrick? Her eyes held him, unflinching, unyielding, refusing any false answers. Patrick's hands tightened slightly around the girl's small fingers, heart hammering, and he replied slowly, deliberately, I will be. I will spend every day proving I am. I know I have no right to demand forgiveness, no right to claim love or trust immediately, but I am ready to dedicate myself fully, without conditions, without expectation, until you believe I am worthy. Binta's expression softened slightly, almost imperceptibly. The faintest hint of something long buried flickering across her features, hope, caution, pain, relief, all wrapped into one complex, unreadable expression. She's watched life happen without her father, Binta said quietly, voice low, deliberate. She doesn't know what to expect. She doesn't know what patience or absence means beyond her small experience. And you've been absent longer than she's lived. How do you plan to bridge that? Patrick's chest constricted, heart pounding, mind racing with every scenario, every potential misstep, every opportunity to fail. By being consistent, he said finally, by showing up every day, by listening, learning, loving, caring, by never leaving again, by letting her define the pace, not me, by letting her mother define the trust I earn, by being fully present, no shortcuts, no excuses, only presence. Ira blinked at him, tilting her head, and for the first time, Patrick felt the enormity of his responsibility fully pressing down. She had never known him, yet she had instinctively reached out. She had innocence, trust, and curiosity combined, a purity he had never experienced outside of imagination or memory. And now he held that trust in his hands, fragile yet fierce, demanding careful handling. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight sink, letting the reality of fatherhood, accountability, and love crash over him in waves, leaving him breathless but determined. Binta finally exhaled, moving slightly to place a hand on his shoulder. Gentle, deliberate, guiding without intrusion. Then prove it, she said softly, voice calm but with an edge of command. Prove that you are the man who can handle what life has given you. Prove that you can love without leaving, without taking, without abandoning. Prove that you can be here fully, for both of us. Patrick nodded, swallowing hard, letting a mixture of relief, fear, and determination surge through him. I will, he whispered, more to himself than to them. I will prove it every day. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The restaurant faded around them, the hum of diners, the clinking of dishes, the muted conversations, all irrelevant as Patrick knelt there, hands still holding Era's small fingers, eyes locked on Binta's, reading every micro-expression, every pause, every unspoken question, every trace of guarded hope. He understood fully that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one with immense responsibility, immense love, and immense challenge. And yet, for the first time in years, he also understood that some risks, some leaps of faith were worth every ache, every weight, every moment of uncertainty. Patrick looked from Era to Binta, eyes glistening, and whispered softly, "I don't care what it takes. I am here. I will stay. I will be the father she deserves, the man you can trust. I will do it all." Era giggled softly, brushing his sleeve again, as if accepting him without words, her innocence bridging the gap between absence and connection. Binta's eyes softened further, yet she remained measured, the final hint of unspoken truth still lingering behind her calm demeanor, a secret that had yet to surface, a weight he would have to earn, slowly, patiently, carefully. Patrick realized fully that life had moved on without him, that consequences were real, and that trust had to be rebuilt one moment at a time. Could he face the father he never knew he was? Could he bridge the years of absence and claim the love and trust of both Binta and Era? And most importantly, what unspoken truths was Binta still protecting, waiting for the right time to reveal? Patrick knelt on the warm wooden floor of the small restaurant, still holding Era's tiny hand in his, feeling the pulse of life and curiosity in her fingers. Her other hand reached toward his face, touching his cheek with innocent curiosity, the kind that only a child who has known no fear or absence could offer. "Papa?" she asked hesitantly, tilting her head, her voice small but confident enough to pierce straight into the tight coil of his chest. Patrick swallowed hard, throat thick, voice catching as he forced the words out despite the tremor of emotion that shook him from the inside. "Era." "Yes, I am," he whispered, eyes brimming with tears he couldn't hide. The weight of the past months, the distance, the missed moments, all hit him at once. A storm crashing through the fragile calm he had carried for so long. Binta stood silently behind her daughter, calm on the surface but with tension that Patrick could see even from the kneeling position. Her gaze was steady, unyielding, a mixture of caution and a hint of hope, as if measuring every beat of Patrick's heart, every breath he took, every tremor of sincerity he could not disguise. Why didn't you tell me?" Patrick asked softly, looking up at her, his voice almost breaking, desperate for truth, for honesty, for the reason behind all that had been hidden. Binta exhaled slowly, glancing down at the child in front of them and then back at him, her eyes reflecting the weight of every choice she had made. "Because," she said carefully, each word deliberate, "I needed a father for my child, not a man who was always absent." The words were sharp, precise, cutting the tension but also illuminating the truth he had ignored for far too long. Patrick's knees felt weak, chest tightening as the realization fully sank in. He had been given a second chance, a life he had never imagined, and yet it came with stakes higher than any boardroom, higher than any business deal he had ever faced. This wasn't about power or control. It was about love, trust, and responsibility, the kind that couldn't be bought, earned quickly, or faked. Patrick leaned forward, eyes locked on both Binta and Era, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I promise," he said, every syllable weighted with sincerity. "I will never choose ambition over love again. I will never let my career, my pride, or anything else come between us. I will be here, fully, for both of you. I will not fail again." Era giggled, a bright, clear sound that seemed to fill the room with warmth, breaking through the years of regret, the months of longing, the endless nights of loneliness. Patrick's lips trembled as he smiled back at her, letting his tears fall freely, the tension inside him dissolving into something that felt like both relief and rebirth. He reached out slowly, letting her climb onto his lap, feeling the small weight of her body press against him, grounding him in a reality he had longed for but never dared imagine. Binta's eyes softened slightly, though she remained cautious, her arms crossing over her chest, briefly as if holding herself together. Even as hope flickered like a candlelight behind her gaze. "Papa, will you stay?" Era asked softly, gripping his shirt, eyes wide with curiosity and cautious trust. Patrick's voice was low, trembling with emotion and certainty. "I will stay," he said firmly, squeezing her tiny hand gently. "I am not going anywhere. I am here, with you, always, every day, every night, no matter what." The little girl's laughter bubbled up again, filling the space with innocence and joy, bridging the gap of months lost, of time stolen by absence. Patrick felt the weight of his mistakes press down, and at the same time, the promise of redemption lift him higher than he had ever felt in his life. Binta exhaled slowly, moving closer, the barest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. She knelt slightly, bringing herself closer to both Patrick and Era, her hand brushing gently against Era's hair, protective, careful, yet tender. "This is your last chance," she said softly, almost a whisper, her voice carrying both warning and hope, authority and trust. "If you fail now, if you turn away again, it's over. Not just with me, but with her. Don't make me regret this, Patrick. Don't make her lose faith before she even knows what love is." Patrick nodded slowly, swallowing hard, eyes locked on hers. "I won't fail. I will be here every day. I will listen, learn, and never take either of you for granted again. This time I will prove it, not with words, but with every action." The room felt alive yet hushed, a world reduced to 3 people, one fragile bond stretched across years of absence and mistakes. Patrick held Era closer, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, feeling her tiny fingers curl around his own. And he realized in that moment that love was more than desire, more than connection. It was responsibility, sacrifice, an unwavering presence. Every choice, every day forward mattered more than any past he could ever rewrite. The laughter of Era filled the silence, washing away years of regret, a balm to his weary heart, a proof that life could offer second chances if one was willing to endure, to wait, to change. Patrick finally rose, holding Era in his arms as Binta followed, her gaze softening yet watchful, measuring his every move, his every breath, his every intention. "Come," he said softly to Era, "let's sit together." He gently placed her on the chair across from him at the familiar table, the same table where he had once dined alone, now transformed into a symbol of reconciliation, trust, and family. He pulled the chair beside her, letting Binta sit, and for the first time, the 3 of them were together at that corner table. Patrick's hands rested on the edge of the table, eyes glistening as he took in the moment, the simplicity, the intimacy, the unspoken promise that love, when nurtured, could heal even the deepest wounds. Binta finally spoke, her voice softer now, carrying a rare warmth. "It's different, isn't it?" she said quietly, almost to herself. Patrick nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips, tears still glistening in his eyes. "Yes," he said. "It's everything I never realized I needed, and everything I never want to lose again." Era laughed between them, small and bright, the sound anchoring Patrick in the present, grounding him in the reality of what mattered most: family, presence, love earned and cherished. He reached out, holding both Binta and Ira close, letting them lean into him, feeling their warmth, their trust, and their fragile hope merge into something strong, unbreakable, and real. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversation, soft laughter, and tentative plans for a future built not on ambition, power, or pride, but on connection, honesty, and unwavering presence. Patrick poured the water, refilled the glasses, adjusted the plates, yet everything seemed secondary to the presence of the two people he had longed for. The bond finally mended, the seat finally filled. Every mistake of the past felt like a lesson, every moment of waiting, every night of regret, every ache of absence. All converged into a clarity he had never known before. The realization that having everything meant nothing until he learned who to share it with, who to hold, who to love without hesitation, without condition, and without fear. Patrick held them both close, eyes glistening with tears and joy, feeling the steady pulse of life, of love, of forgiveness, of second chances, and whispered softly, "I am here. I am not leaving. I promise this time I will never leave again." Era laughed, a sound that melted every shadow of the past, and Binta finally allowed herself a faint smile, her hand brushing lightly against Patrick's. The corner table, once a symbol of solitude and absence, now radiated warmth, hope, and a promise that love, when chosen consciously, could endure beyond mistakes, absence, and time. Patrick realized fully in that moment, with their laughter, warmth, and trust surrounding him, that life had finally given him what he had sought all along. Not accolades, not power, not recognition, but the family he had never known, the love he had longed for, and the chance to never make the same mistakes again. The seat across from him, once empty, was no longer a reminder of loneliness. It was a monument to hope realized, to patience rewarded, and to love that had finally stayed. Could Patrick truly live up to the promise he had made? Could he remain present through every challenge, every test, every day ahead? And as the laughter of Ara echoed and Binta's gaze softened, would this time, finally, be the love that stayed, unbroken, unshaken, unending? Wow, what a journey! Patrick finally learned that having everything means nothing until you know who to share it with. Binta, Era, and Patrick's story reminds us that love, patience, and second chances can change everything if we're brave enough to wait and fight for it. I want to hear from you. What would you do if life gave you a second chance like Patrick did? Comment below and share your thoughts. If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale from Heartwoven Tales. Thank you for watching, and remember, love is worth the wait. See you in the next story.